All right, welcome everyone. This is episode 12 of Final Cut Pro Help Live. I'm going to be your host, Jared Ewing, on a tour of some features. And this episode is episode 12. I'm very excited because this marks the 1 year anniversary of the first time we streamed Final Cut Pro Help Live. So I've been doing this editor, but if you do know these, you should be a lot more useful as an editor. So if you can think of better tips, please put them in the comments. If you're watching this live, let me know you're here. Just say hi in the chat over time, and hopefully you're a little bit newer at editing, and maybe you can save a lot of headache by learning these tips here. So let's dive into it. What we're going to do in this stream, I'm going to start out by showing you those 10 tips. We're just going to go through them. Some of them are just going to be verbal tips that you'll take to the bank. Other ones, I'll actually have some demos to go along with it. In either case, at the end of those 10 tips, I also have a Q&A section lined up. If you watched the last episode last month, we had a ton of questions. The stream went over 2 hours. That's not going to happen today. Right now I have 4 questions. So if you have a question, don't hesitate. Put it in the comments there, and we should have some time to be able to answer all of those. I do also have a motion demo at the end of this stream. So if you're a Final Cut editor, and if you've never used the app called Motion, this will be an introduction into that app and give you an idea of what it's about. The other really exciting thing we're going to do this year, because it is March, and if you follow sports at all, you know it's March Madness. So we're going to go along with that, and I've got a bracket set up to find the shortcut of the year. So if you want to cast your vote for the 2019 shortcut of the year, what do you think is the most useful shortcut that you use? You can vote for as many shortcuts as you want right now. From now until the 14th, we're going to be just gathering all your votes and then put it into a bracket, and we'll start to narrow those down over the month. So if you find a specific keyboard shortcut really useful, you can vote for that on all the social media platforms using @FinalCutProHelp, whether that be Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. I'm going to have a lot of posts on there if you're following on Instagram with @FinalCutProHelp. You've seen I've done a couple the past few days of voting. We're going to do that all throughout this month to narrow down and hopefully find what the most useful shortcuts are. So send me a direct message, post a comment, even on this stream here. Let me know what your favorite shortcuts are. You can also send an email to finalcutprohelp@me.com. And again, right now until the 14th, we're just voting on any shortcut that you use in Final Cut or Final Cut related. It can be a macOS shortcut. Just vote for any of them. And then on the 15th, we're going to have that bracket up to show the top 64 shortcuts based on those votes, and we'll go from there. So definitely that should be exciting. Hopefully we'll find some very useful shortcuts out of that. And if you're new to editing, there's over 300, maybe even 400 different shortcuts built into Final Cut that are assigned to your keyboard right now under the tips of your fingertips. And this is going to be a way to narrow down what the most useful ones are. So if you want to know which shortcuts you should learn, this is hopefully going to find the most useful ones. All right, so let's dive into this episode with the 10 tips. And the first tip that I have is, if you're a Final Cut editor, I recommend that you should understand the library. And part of that is making a backup. So what does that mean as far as understanding the library? Well, let's dive into a little demo here. So I have Final Cut Pro on the screen here, and if you've opened Final Cut, you will see a library. It's very hard to open Final Cut without a library being opened. And you can see the library at the top left corner here. In my case, I've just called it the stock library. This is the one I use for all my demos, and it's just got a bunch of stock footage and random things. So that's the name of the library. If you hover your cursor or your mouse over the name of the library, really any names, you'll get a little tooltip that comes up, and it actually shows you where that library is stored. And with these tips, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but you want to understand where this footage is stored and how Final Cut interacts with those files. So the library is the first thing, and your library contains everything. So if you have clips, media, things like these video clips, we have a project down here at the bottom, all of that stuff is stored somehow in this Final Cut library. And in some cases, it's stored just as an alias pointing to another file. In other cases, it's going to be stored in the event, which is a part of this library. And that's kind of the first thing I like editors to understand, is that that library does have everything. If we think of iTunes, if you use iTunes at all for playing back music and movies, iTunes has a media library where it stores everything. And if you go down into your Finder, usually that iTunes library is in your music folder. And you have this little folder called iTunes. When you go into it, there's a bunch of stuff in here, but one of the folders is called iTunes Media, and that's where your music and all of your other files are stored. So as an iTunes user, you don't need to know all of this about this library, but it's good to understand where your music's stored so you don't accidentally delete your iTunes folder. In a similar way, it's good to understand where those libraries are stored. So I know that on my external drive, that's where this library called stock is stored. I can see it listed here. I see the size of it. And I know all my media and a bunch of other stuff is in that library. So when you import media into your library, you're going to get an option that says, do you want to leave those files in place, or do you want to copy them to the library? And so if you don't understand what that means, it can be very confusing down the road where all of your files are stored and how it's referencing everything. And that's why, as a new editor, I usually recommend doing the option that says copy to library. That way, Final Cut will organize all of the media into this library, and you as a new editor don't have to struggle too much with those library files. But that's my first tip, is I recommend that you understand your Final Cut Pro library. And that was just a brief overview. You can watch other videos on this channel that go into the library in a little bit more detail. But you should definitely understand it, because that's where all of your files are stored. And then I always recommend making a backup. If you lose that library, not only are you losing all of your media files, you're losing all the work and the hours that you spent into it. So make sure that you go in and make a backup of your content, whether that be using Time Machine or another source. There's many ways to make that backup. It's just super important. So do that. If you have any problems with that, any questions about that, you can leave a comment on this video, but with backup, it's super important. So email me directly using finalcutprohelp@me.com, and I'd be happy to help you out with setting up that backup plan. All right, so that's tip 1 out of 10. My second tip is I recommend taking the time to review and organize that library and your content. It's super important to do that. Many editors that are newer to this whole editing world, and really this can apply to anything, a lot of people want to just jump right in and start editing. They want to start putting transitions in, mixing music, doing all this stuff that, in my opinion, as an editor, is a lot of fun. But if you can take the time to review your footage and organize your content, you'll save yourself a lot of time in the long run. So the review part of it is important. If you watch the content that you have, as an editor, you will then understand what options you have available to you. Many editors that I see, especially if they're in a rush, will just quickly skim across clips, or they might take the last take if you're editing a film together, and they don't see everything that they have. They don't see all those little nuances that happen with characters, the expressions they make on their face. And if you could just take the time to watch your video, I find it makes you as an editor a lot better, because you just know your content in a much, much deeper detail than other people. And this is why a lot of editors, if you work in the film industry, if you can go on set when they're actually recording the content, obviously that can be asking a lot depending on your scenario and your setup. But I remember back years ago when I was shooting and editing wedding videos, for me being on and at the event and in that wedding, I could go and see what was happening. And then as an editor, I had a much better understanding of what was happening. And that's the same thing here. If you can be on set and review it, awesome. If you can't, when you get all of that content, review it. And then use Final Cut's features to organize that content. Go in and mark your clips with keywords, with roles, all of these different features that are built into Final Cut. Definitely take advantage of them and organize that content. If you have questions about that, you can certainly watch other videos on this channel that go into a lot of detail with organizing and how to use those features. So that's tip number 2, review and organize your content before you edit. It's just going to help out so much. All right, tip number 3, I recommend learning about split edits. So what is a split edit? Well, according to Wikipedia, a split edit is a transition from one shot to another in film or video where transition of the audio and the video happen at different times. I found Wikipedia's explanation was extremely clear. So let me show you this in Final Cut, because this is actually really simple to do inside of Final Cut. So I'm going to play this back. You may not be able to hear it, and that's okay, but you'll be able to see what's happening. So in this scene, I have a very simple scene. Let me get rid of the browser and the inspector. We don't need the effects browser right now. And I'm going to drag the interface down here just to make my viewer a little bit larger so it's clearer for you to see. So on here, I have 2 clips, right? And this is going to be scene 1 and scene 2. And these are not anything that are mixed together in any way, but imagine that you have a project that you're watching, and in the film, you're going from the day at the beach to nighttime where we have the fireworks going off. So if we watch this, we can see the beach, and then we transition to these fireworks at night. It's an extremely jarring transition between scenes. There's not anything smooth happening between these two. So to make this a smoother transition, we could certainly go in, click on the edit point here, and use Command T to add in the default transition, which in this case is a cross dissolve. And I'm going to hit Z to hold my zoom tool. I'm going to let go Z to zoom in there. So with that, if I play it back, we see it, and then we transition over. And you might not be able to hear it because I don't think I have it routed through the stream here, but at the bottom you can see the waveforms here, and what's happening is these fireworks are popping off, and you start being able to hear it right as the transition is almost finished. So even this is not a smooth transition over. So this is where a split edit comes in handy. And with Final Cut Pro 10 here, you have some built-in options that make split edits extremely easy. All you need to do is double click on the audio, and it'll expand the audio out. I can then take this audio and just drag it to the left here to expand it out. And then I'm going to use the little handle to add a fade, and this will fade the audio in. You could do the same thing with the ending clip here. If I wanted to, I could drag this out and then fade that out so that the water and the beach sound also fades out. Then I'll just double click again to move those down. And what will happen here is essentially I'm hearing very lightly the popping of the fireworks, and then I fade in. So as a viewer, I'm listening to the fireworks and I'm expecting them, and it's not a jarring transition over. And that was done using a split edit. So that's a feature built into Final Cut that almost any editor that has some training will understand how to do. You can do that in just about any app, but Final Cut makes it extremely easy just to double click, expand that audio out, make your edits, and then you can collapse them together. Even though you can't see the audio over here, it is there and it is playing. So definitely use split edits to make your transitions, especially with audio, a little bit smoother together. And you might have heard of these two terms as either a J cut or an L cut. And that's because you have your video up here that kind of loops down like a J, or in the case of this one, like an L, depending on which way you're going. That's the same thing. J cut, L cut, split edit, pretty much all the same thing there. Just depends on which way you're going. So that's my tip number 3 there, is make your split edits and use that feature. Let's go here. So that's 1, 2, and 3. Let's get on to tip number 4 here. Don't assume. This one is something I don't have a demo for, but I just want to remind viewers that you don't want to assume that a take is a good take or something went wrong. And as far as your organization, a lot of editors, especially if they're newer, they kind of think they know everything as far as how you're laying out your clips and what it's going to look like. But I strongly recommend that you try things out as you're editing, because you might discover something that's amazing, and you might try something out and it doesn't work, but then you discover something else that works even better. So don't just assume that how you are going to arrange things, or maybe using a certain type of title or a certain type of transition, is going to end up a certain way. I work on a lot of projects where, as an editor, and even not as myself, but even other editors, they know that they have the best cut and the best edit that they're doing, but either the director, the producer, someone they're working with, the client, wants them to try something else out. And they end up going and doing that, and it doesn't look better because a lot of times the editor does know better. But in doing that, they discover another way of doing something, or maybe a way of tweaking their current edit to make it even better. So don't just assume that what you're doing is the be-all, end-all to the way it's going to look. There's some really good ways to discover things. So that's my fourth tip. And then my fifth tip here is avoid jump cuts and use B-roll. And this is something I just see a trend in videos that are going online right now where people are cutting out every little and breath that the speaker is saying, and they're, instead of putting anything over it to cover up that editing, there's just a lot more jump cuts. And I recommend trying to avoid that. It just, for me, it looks very amateur when you do that, and not something you should do. So what is a jump cut and how can you avoid it? Well, let me play a little clip here. I'm going to hit Z again. I'm holding the Z key down, by the way, to activate the zoom tool, and then I can zoom into this section of the timeline. When I let go of the mouse, it zooms in. When I let go of Z, it goes back to my select tool, my arrow tool. So in this clip, we have my sister, my dad here, and her kids jumping up and down. They're looking at this fountain, right? So let me just play this back. And notice this is Jackson down here, and I liked how he was jumping up and down. He was really excited, and I liked the pointing that was happening here. But right here we have the jump cut that you just see the jump cut, and that's a jump cut. You're in essentially the same scene, but you're cutting to a different time. It's not a pretty cut. It's just jarring. So I recommend avoiding that. And a way that you can cover up those jump cuts is by using B-roll. So I have this other cut here that is of the fountain that we were looking at in that case. So I'm actually going to take this and drag it above on my off of my primary storyline here. I'm dragging it above to cover up that edit. And now if we were to go through and watch it, I can see the pointing happens. I cut up to the B-roll, and then when I'm done with that B-roll, I cut back to the primary, or the A-roll, which are primary footage here. But you'll notice Jackson's no longer jumping up and down, so I kind of missed that. So that's where I'm going to use the position tool, which if you look at your tools here, that's the third tool down. You can just use the letter P key. So I'm going to hit the position tool and actually drag this clip to the right about there. And the position tool just allows me to rearrange these without looking at the magnetic timeline. So it puts in this gap clip here. I can then hit the A key to switch back to the arrow tool. I might shorten this one up a little bit. And now if I play this, I see the clip, I go to the B-roll, and then I come back, and there Jackson's jumping up and down. Looks a lot smoother as far as the edit goes. Now going back to an earlier tip, you can certainly use your J and L cuts, a split edit, to smooth out the audio for this. So I could double click on the B-roll here, expand the fountain audio, add a fade in using the little handle that's there, which with my zoomed in cursor is a little bit difficult, but there we go. Get our handles. I fade the audio in and out. I could do the same thing on these clips just to mix everything together with that split edit. And then this will be a much smoother edit compared to using a jump cut. And for most viewers, it's a lot more pleasing to watch that. So that's my tip number 5, is don't assume. Try it, experiment with all those things, and then you can go on and use a jump cut as a last resort. There are transitions built into Final Cut to help with jump cuts, but if you can avoid them, use that B-roll. That's why you get that. That's why you collect that, and it's just so much better. The next thing is kind of something I've been demoing throughout this, and let's find the benefits. You have a lot of features built into Final Cut, and I don't recommend just using every little feature that's there. There should be a reason that you're using those features. And as an example, you have a transition browser inside of Final Cut, and there's a bunch of transitions available to you. You can use a cross dissolve, you could use a jump cut like we were just seeing. There's many, many transitions in there. But don't just use those transitions and use those features because you can. There should be a reason that you're adding those transitions. How does it actually benefit your edit? So don't just use all the features that are there. Don't just use multicam because it's a feature that you can use. Find the benefits. Is it actually benefiting your workflow and what you're doing in your edits? And this is the same with effects, with audio, with anything that you use. Make sure that it's actually benefiting your edit. And that's the thing, a lot of new editors, they just want to use all these features because you're using this tool, and it's really cool that you could put all these transitions and effects, but does it actually benefit your video? Don't get sidetracked with all those features there. And it kind of comes to my next one, which is don't neglect the audio and the color. These are two of many, many areas of your video that you should spend some time on. And again, a lot of newer editors go in and they over edit the video, and then they're not paying too much attention to their music, or they look at the audio levels as one of the last things, if at all. In many cases, when you're going through and working with the audio, it's very common that the audio ruins your video. So if you can have great audio, spend a little bit of time mixing it correctly and putting a little bit of focus on it. I mean, audio supports the video. I would say it's half, if not more, about the audio than it is about the video. And a way that you can tell this is watch a whole bunch of TV shows, movies, especially great movies, and mute the speakers and just watch the edits. And you'll find that the edits a lot of times are really nice. And if you can watch a film muted and it looks really good, that's a really good sign of great editing. But then bring in the music and the audio and see how the dialogue and the sound effects and everything mixes together. And you as an editor will become better by reviewing those things. And it's the same with the color. In many cases, a lot of cameras shoot pretty nice content off of them, and the color might look okay if you're shooting from an iPhone or another camera. But if you can go through and color correct, that's a huge step, and it can take your movie from just looking okay to really standing out. So color correction is another skill. As a new editor, I strongly recommend that you spend some time learning and using, because it'll help out. And the next action here, next tip, getting tip number 8, we're flying through these, is to cut on action or audio. And here's what I mean by that. Let me exit out of this. I'll switch back over. And I got these next two clips here. If you've watched any of the channel, I've probably seen these. I took a whole bunch of different random cameras and set them up as I ran down this hill here in California. And as we're running down, you can see, let me play just this part here. So I come up to the camera and I'm going to cut to a different angle. So I'll play this. And notice how when I come up to the edit, I run past the camera here, right? And then there's a couple frames. It's a very short amount of time, but there's a couple frames here where you're not seeing anything happening on the screen except maybe some of the dust settling. And then I cut to the next angle, and I'm already way past the camera there and flying down the rest of the hill. So here you can see the iPad that was set up for recording this angle. So that's something that can be, it's very subtle, but if you can cut on action or when someone's talking about something, your edit can be a lot nicer. And a tool that's built into Final Cut to help with this is the trim tool. So I know these two clips are synced up. I'm just going to hit the letter T for trim to bring that up. And if I go onto the edit here, I can actually click and drag this and roll this edit to the left and the right. And what I'm seeing on the left viewer is the last frame of the first clip. And on the right side, I'm seeing the first frame of the next clip. So right as we'll see as my foot's going by the camera there, that's when I'll cut on that edit. And if I go back and play this, I'm cutting right on that action. And it's a little bit smoother of an edit. So if you can, I recommend cutting on that action, cutting on words. If someone points to something and they're moving their hand up to go and point, right as they're doing that move, might be a good time to cut. Now, again, that doesn't work in every scenario, but in many cases, that can help out your edit to make things smooth, especially when you're dealing with a lot of action. All right, so that was my tip number 8 that I had. Now, let me go back in here. So my next tip is to take breaks. Get away from your project. And you should definitely be taking breaks. I believe the recommendation is take a 10-minute break every hour that you're working at the computer, which is excellent. You should do that. Help avoid issues with your hands, with cramping up, all that good stuff. But another big reason that you should take breaks is to get away from your project. It's very common that you'll get editor's block and you'll just be digging yourself a deeper hole by trying out edits, and you've been sitting at the system for 10, 12 hours or more. So strongly recommend get away from your project. Even if you go and work on a different project or something else, taking breaks is extremely important. And I myself, there's actually apps and things that you can get to help with this, but I like to put those apps and those reminders. A lot of times it'll just be a 50-minute timer on my phone, and I'll hit that so I know just to get up, get away from the project, take a little break, and then come back to it. If you can get into the habit of doing that, you will certainly not get as exhausted and burnt out from all this editing. But I'm sure you will also find your edits become actually much nicer, much better. Obviously, there are constraints to that as well. If you're working in a very fast-paced environment where you have to get something done, well, then it can be tough to take a break. But at least take 10 seconds, 30 seconds, get away from it just a little bit, you refresh. This editing stuff, there is the physical component to it in your arms and your hands and everything that you want to take a break from, but it's so mentally draining if you're digging yourself in. It's very fun. I find as an editor, it's a lot of fun to edit, and if you can have fun doing it, it's awesome. It's a great place to be. But you still want to take that break, let your mind rest, let your hands rest, and get up, stretch a little bit, all that good stuff. So that's my 9th tip there, because many editors don't do that, and it's rough. And then my final tip in the 10 tips I believe every editor should know is that you should review as a viewer. And what do I mean by that? Well, there's a couple things. So you want to try to watch your content as if you're watching it for the first time, and it's the first time you're seeing all of this. And that can be very tough, and it does take some time to train yourself to be able to view it. But imagine that you're seeing the transition, you're seeing the titles, the audio, you're hearing it all for the first time, because that's how your viewers are going to watch this. So if you can do that, then I think you can make better editing decisions. And if I go back to the tip 6, where I said find the benefits of things, many editors will go through and add every transition they can, every title they can, all these flashy things, and then they watch it and themselves as the editor find the edit very exciting because they've watched it 100 times, right? But if you can watch this as your viewers are for the first time, then you'll see how distracting these transitions are, how distracting certain titles are, different editing choices that you've made are, and they don't actually benefit the reason for your content. So again, review your content as your viewers will, in that sense, for the creative part of it, but also review the content where you intend this to be played back. Is this something that you're going to be uploading to YouTube, and that's your primary platform? Well, if it is, go on to YouTube and watch this video and see how it looks, because YouTube compresses things a certain way, so it may look different on YouTube than it does inside of Final Cut. But if you're going up to YouTube, I'm sure a lot of people are going to watch this on their phone and maybe even their TVs and different things. So go on to each of those devices and review that content, again, if you can, if you have access to those types of devices. For me, myself, a lot of my videos I'm putting up onto YouTube or other places, but I have an iPad, I have an iPhone, I have an Apple TV, I have all these different devices that can access YouTube, and I try to go on and watch the videos that I'm posting there on those different devices to verify it looks correct. So if you can, watch on all of your devices and then try to put yourself in your viewer's shoes as if you're watching this for the first time. And those are my 10 tips that I believe every editor should know. And again, there are many, many other tips out there. There's not just 10, there's tons of other stuff out there. So I'm sure I've missed some tips. And if you want, you can leave a comment below with the tips that you think as every editor should know. And this can be something that professional editors should know, but it can also be something that you as a newer editor wish you had learned early on. So leave those tips in the comments. Don't hesitate to reach out. You can always send an email to me. Let me know what tips that you have that you would recommend other newer editors, or really any editors, should know. So I see a comment in the chat here. So we're going to get into our Q&A here. And that comment says, "Hey, Jared, converting over from Premiere Pro on a PC and slowly learning the keyframe difference. What's your recommendation method on viewing where the keyframes are and editing their locations on each clip?" That's an excellent question. So let's look at that, and then I'll get into my prepared Q&A section. So for those of you that don't know, what is being asked here is essentially how can you edit keyframes? And I'm going to show a couple demos here for keyframes just in case you don't know. I'm going to expand out my clips here so that they're a little bit higher, and I'm going to expand the audio. We'll go that height. So one way that you can add keyframes is to the audio. And I'm just going to hold down the Option key and click on this little line down here to add a couple keyframes. And then I'm going to drag this middle portion here to drag those 2 keyframes down. So one way that keyframes are used is with audio. And notice my audio volume, I come to this keyframe, which keyframe says at this moment in time, I want this parameter, which right now is the audio level, to be at that level, at -4 dB. And then over time, until this next keyframe, I want the audio to lower, in this case to -50 dB. So with 2 keyframes, you're essentially making a change in a parameter over time, which in this case, it was audio level, and you can see it very clearly what's happening here. So that's one way that you can add keyframes. Let's look at another way. I'm going to go into the inspector, and what you'll see on the right of almost any parameter that you're looking at, there's this little diamond button that allows you to add a keyframe. So let's do transform, and I'm going to go over to the beach because it's an easier clip to see here. So let's say with this beach clip, we want it to start out like it is here, and then we want to shrink this whole clip down. Probably not a great editing choice, but it will do that, and we're going to do that using the scale position. So if I scale it up, you'll see it zooms in. We're going to scale it down so it's a smaller clip. So I want it to start out at 100%, which we'll do at 100 at this moment in time. I'll click on the keyframe button to add to the scale all parameter, which means at this moment in time, at about 3 seconds, it's going to be that scale. Then I'm going to move the playhead down just a second or two. I'm going to shrink my scale down to make it a smaller clip. And again, I don't know why you'd actually want to do that in most scenarios, but hopefully you can see what's happening. Notice it put a gold diamond next to scale all, which is both X and Y, and it's shrinking down. So that means over time, if we skim across this, you can see that essentially with those 2 keyframes, we're scaling down the picture. So the question in the chat was, what's the recommended method of viewing where the keyframes are and editing their location on each clip? And I'm assuming that means in time, because your keyframes can be with any parameter. So in the inspector, we can certainly click on these little navigation buttons to navigate between the 2 keyframes, but it doesn't allow us to change where they are in time, right? So let me change the size of the timeline. I'm going to bring this up a little bit. I'm going to shrink down the height of the clips just to make this a little bit easier to see. So Final Cut has a really cool feature called the Video Animation Editor. And you can right-click on a clip, and there's an option here that says Show Video Animation, or you can just use the shortcut Control-V. And Control-V is the answer to your question. Use Control-V. When you do that, it shows you this video animation section here, and now we can see our keyframes. I'm set to transform all. I could go down here and choose just the scale or a different parameter, but if I do that, notice we have our keyframes listed right here, and if I wanted to change this, I just click and drag those keyframes to the left or to the right, and that changes their position in time. So that's the way I recommend doing that. If you're new to Premiere or new to Final Cut, moving over from Premiere makes perfect sense. I'm sure you understand what keyframes are and how you would use them. But this feature, being able to show the video animation editor, allows you to move those in time. If I'm remembering correctly, I'm sure I've done it in a shorter video, but in a previous episode of Final Cut Pro Help Live, I did cover this animation editor in a lot greater detail, so I'd recommend going back and watching that if you can. There's ways that you can go in and solo these so you don't see all of them, and some other things you can do with this. There's also an audio animation editor. If you do a lot with audio effects, you can also use that as a way to reposition those keyframes. So it's a great feature of Final Cut. Many newer editors don't use it because they're not getting into that much detail with keyframes. However, as you do, you're going to want to refine those by a couple seconds. Instead of deleting the keyframe and then going and positioning it somewhere else, use that animation editor. And again, that's just right-clicking, saying Show Video Animation. You can use Control-V, or it's also up in the menus somewhere. Okay, the next question I got here was from Philippe, who tweeted at Final Cut Pro Help, asking if anybody was having rendering issues with Final Cut Pro 10 in the latest Mojave update. And specifically when background rendering is on in Final Cut Pro 10, his interface, Final Cut, everything was staying extremely slow. So this is a great question because when you do an update of anything, whether it's an update to Final Cut or it's an update to your Mac OS system, you're making changes. An update is changes to your system. And in most cases, those changes are going to be small. They're designed to fix little bugs or fix issues. And in some cases, it's a lot more major where they introduce new features and other things that you can do with the app. In any case, I do recommend if you are the only one working on your system, that you be careful with those updates and you verify that they do work correctly. And when I was talking with Philippe, we went back and forth, and after that back and forth, he showed me a discussion page where other people were saying that they had the same issue. And going to discussion pages and the community out there, especially if you're the only editor, you're working at home, you're not in a community there, going online is a great way to discuss with other people. And, it's an excellent way to figure out if people are all having the same issue. Or you'll get tips and all that good stuff. That's why you're here. That's one of the reasons that I do this, is to support the community. However, you should be careful with the solutions that you see on those forums because they may fix your issue and they may be fixing similar issues and it could correct it. But the symptoms that you have could match what they have, but the issues is actually slightly different. And with Philippe, after going back and forth, the recommendation that he got from this discussion page was to disable background rendering. And yes, that did mitigate the symptoms of slowness. He was able to edit, and he didn't find he was getting the spinning wheel and all that annoying stuff. But he did so as a workaround with disabling that feature. And the problem with disabling background rendering is now you don't have that feature. Background rendering is awesome. When you're not doing anything, your system takes over and it can start rendering for you. When you go over to answer that email, Final Cut in the background is rendering for you and taking advantage of the system when those resources are available. So it's a great feature. So if you have to disable a feature just to make Final Cut work, well, something's not right there. So what happened in Philippe's case, we discovered that a change from the background rendering setting start time actually resolved the issue. So if you go up to Final Cut Pro and click Preferences, you can use Command Comma as the shortcut. If you go in here, under your preferences, there's an option under Playback that says Rendering Background Render. And you can see here it starts after 0.3 seconds. And I didn't spend the time to go through and verify this, but I believe after a recent update to Final Cut, and I think this is what triggered it, it changed this default to 0.3 seconds. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the default used to be 3 seconds. And this may just be a little software oversight from the developers, from Apple, but one little tiny zero may have gotten deleted from the code that now starts this background rendering after 0.3 seconds. And although that's great, some people like to do that because then your rendering starts right away. That means just a split second, 0.3 seconds, just a very small amount of time, every single time you use the system, it's starting to go through and render. And in Philippe's case, we changed this. We actually set it up to 20 seconds, but you could probably change this back to 3 seconds and it would be fine. But that resolved his issue. So instead of going onto these forms and disabling background rendering, we actually were able to do a little bit more research, dig in a little bit more, and find that just changing this time allowed Philippe not only to keep the feature of background rendering, but also avoided having to disable the feature completely. So the summary of all that is, if you are having rendering issues in the latest version, check your background rendering time, and I would change that. I like to use 20 seconds personally, but you can change that. I would change it at least to 3 seconds. That'll probably resolve the problem there. But also, regardless of what the issue is that you're having, if you go online and look at discussion forums, don't assume that that solution is 100% what you're dealing with. Try to get secondary and verification of it in other places, because a lot of these issues, if they're happening from an update, most likely there will be a lot of reports of that issue, and another update will come out to fix those problems. Related to that, go up to the Final Cut Pro menu, and there's an option here that says Provide Final Cut Pro Feedback. Please go in and do that. If there's any features you want added or any weirdness to Final Cut, provide Apple that feedback. When you do this, it brings up a window here. Let me bring it over so it's on my main screen here. Brings up a window here that allows you to submit feedback. The more detail you can put into these forms, this is how the developers of Final Cut get your feedback and understand what you actually need. So you don't assume that they understand exactly how you're feeling. The only way they know that is because you submitted your feedback. And I'm sure many of the pieces of feedback that get submitted, or I know, are actually duplicates. Someone's already thought of that and submitted the feedback. But you putting in another request for a feature or a change or whatever it might be will help bump up those other requests. If 100 people are requesting a feature versus just one, then the chances are that those 100 requests are going to get looked at and actually get implemented. So please submit your feedback. If you have something specific that you want in there, let me know. I can always submit feedback on your behalf and encourage that feedback if I think it should be added. But if you add it and I add it and we get a whole bunch of people adding it, a lot of times we can get those features added in. Cool. So that was Philippe's little case there. And yeah, that's that question. Let's go on to the next one. And this question is about media storage. Person says, I have a MacBook Pro 2018, but it only has 512 gigabytes SSD storage, which is a great storage. I wish I had that much on this iMac. But SSD storage, nice and fast, it's great. But then the person says, I have two external drives, one that's a 4 terabyte SSD, and a second that's a Seagate hard drive that's 5,200 RPMs. And if you know anything about hard drives, that's a slow hard drive right there. The SSD is going to be very, very fast because it's not a spinning drive, but 5,200 RPMs is a slower drive. Usually you'll have 7,200 RPMs or greater. They're both connected with USB 3. And the person asks, should I store everything on the external SSD, or should I put the actual media, proxies, and project on the SSD for fast access and the project file on the HDD, the standard hard drive? I'm thinking if I put the media files on the external SSD and everything else on the external HDD and tell Final Cut to leave files in place, and then they put ... so confused. Is this best? And I'm not sure. Then they say I'm not too sure what needs fast access and what does not. Any help would be greatly appreciated. Well, that's an excellent question. Something that you should understand. So one of the people that responded, this was on a Creative Cow forum. One of the responses was, you're going to get better results putting everything on the SSD drive, which is the solid state drive. But for sure, put your cache files there. So I agree completely with that post, and all of this stuff can be really confusing. But the fundamental question with all this comes down to, where should I store files to get the best performance from Final Cut Pro 10? So before we know where we can put them, we have to understand what we have. So if you have a solid state drive, then the solid state drive is going to be faster compared to the standard hard drive in almost any cases. Now, you might have, like I do, I have an external RAID drive, which is actually multiple hard drives mixed together to increase its performance, and that may get us faster performance as well. So what you want to do really is store everything on the fastest hard drive that you have. That's going to give you, in most cases, the best performance. And your internal hard drive, maybe an SSD, that 512 gigs, if you can, store your project there internally. And in most cases, that's going to give you the best performance, in my opinion. And in most cases, that's true. Because when you are going externally, you mentioned USB 3, your connection type is very important to all this, because your media that's down here, Final Cut is accessing that almost any time you do anything in Final Cut. So not only do you need fast storage, which the SSD is usually going to be your fastest storage, you also need a fast path to get there. So internally, tend to be pretty fast. Externally, depends on the type of cable you're using. If you're using USB 2 and you have an SSD external storage drive, well, that USB 2 is going to slow you way down. So how can you figure this all out for your own system and actually get some data that's helpful to you? Well, let me minimize Final Cut here. Close the Finder window. If you go up to the Apple, you can go into About This Mac, and then there's a More Info button, and then that'll allow you to get into an app called System Profiler. And I've taken some screenshots here when I had some drives connected to show you some things. Inside of System Profiler, on the left column, you're going to see all your hardware and software. Go over there and click on the type of connection that you're using to your drive. So this was on the iMac. Yeah, on the iMac here, we had a Thunderbolt and a USB connection. So if I clicked on Thunderbolt, I could see the Thunderbolt bus. And if you look down in all the gibberish that's down here, you should see a speed listed, which I've outlined in green here. And I did the same thing on the right side here with USB, my USB connection here, to see this speed as well. So notice, just talking about speed for a second, I can get up to 5 gigabits per second connected through the USB drive that I'm set up on. Where over on the Thunderbolt, it says I can get up to 40 gigabytes per second, or gigabits per second. So that's, in that case, I would strongly recommend trying to use a Thunderbolt cable to get to your drive. However, if you look at your external hard drive, when you go to buy a drive, usually it'll say how fast that drive is. And actually, let me bring up a window here, and let's take a look at this really quickly. Thanks for bearing with me just a second while I load this up. I didn't think about doing this before, but this will actually show you kind of what you want to look for. Because the drive speed, even if you have a 40 gigabit per second connection to Thunderbolt, if your external drive can't go at that speed, then you're not going to take advantage of it. So I just went to apple.com and looked at their external drives. Here we have a G drive. This one is connecting using USB-C. So if I scroll down and look at the drive specs, we'll see if it shows it for us. It should give us a speed somewhere in here. Yeah, so look at in the overview here, it says featuring a plug-and-play USB-C port and transfer speeds up to 135 megabytes per second is what it says there. So 135 megabytes per second compared to 40 gigabits per second. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to take advantage of 40 gigabytes with this drive. So you want to make sure that your drive is going to be able to actually take care of those speeds, right? So you can get the fastest hard drive you want, but if you don't have a connection and a cable and everything that goes through it, you're not going to be able to take advantage of it. So that's one thing, is make sure essentially your computer has the connection, which is the bus, the Thunderbolt bus or the USB bus, and then make sure your cables allow you to get to that drive at that speed. So on the right side here, I want to point out something out with the USB. The way that my RAID is set up, it's a much older rated drive, and I actually have a USB eSATA adapter so that I can connect to that drive using eSATA, which gives me the fastest performance to that RAID, which unfortunately is only 5 gigabits per second, but if I connected it using a direct USB cable, I would see that this speed is much, much slower. So look for the fastest speed you can get using System Profiler. And let's see. Yeah, so that's essentially the speed and everything. Use System Profiler. The next question, let's take a look here. I'm looking at one in the chat here. We have, I need to synchronize my audio, but sometimes that choice is grayed out. It's grayed out under clip, and it's not shown under new project as an audio choice. So this one I probably would need to see the actual project itself, but I'm assuming what you're referring to, when you select a couple clips here, you can right-click on them, and there's an option that says Synchronize Clips. I believe that's the option that you're seeing that's grayed out, that you're not able to go to. And there could be a couple different reasons that that's coming up. Let me try something here. Let's find a clip that does not have audio to it. I believe this one is video only. That might be a synchronized, or that might be a compound clip, but let's try this. If I select both of those clips and right click, let's synchronize them as well. That was one thing that I was thinking, is that if it doesn't have audio, it might be grayed out. Of course, now all of these are letting me go through and do the synchronized. But my guess is the type of clip is probably not compatible to be able to do the sync clip. We can try this. Let's see if I have I think I have some compound clips in here. I wonder if it'll do it with the 360 clip. Yeah, it lets me do that one. Yeah, even the compound clip, it's letting me go through and do all those synchronized clips. So I believe in your clips there must be something that's just not selected correctly, or there's something about the way that those clips are mixing that is preventing them from being able to be synced, because you should be able to just click on the two clips there, right click on them, or use the Option Command G to synchronize those clips, and then you'll see the various options for how you want to sync those clips. If it has audio, yeah, you should be able to do it. It may be, I'm trying to think of reasons that it would prevent that, but most likely it's something about the clips that just is making them incompatible. Let me read the questions. Yeah, because I think if we do this on the timeline, I don't know if we even get that option to do the, yeah, we don't get the sync clip option. It has to happen all in the browser, and I believe that's where you're doing all of that. So with that one, I would say send me an email, again, finalcutprohelp@b.com. and show me what's selected. Show me the clip information, and we can dig into that and try to find out what's triggering that. Mohit earlier today messaged me on Instagram, and he had a great question. He was wondering if Final Cut Pro comes pre-installed when you buy a Mac. And unfortunately, the answer to that is no. It doesn't come free pre-installed on your Mac. However, if you do go to apple.com and you're thinking about buying a Mac, let me bring this window over here. Let's say we are going to buy a MacBook. When you go to buy a system, the website here gives you a lot of details about the system itself, but when you go up to the buy menu, you have an option here when you go down after you select your machine, which if you're doing a MacBook, you probably want a little faster machine here, right? In your options here, there's an option to have the things pre-installed, and actually, they might, on purpose, block it from the MacBook. Let's see if they do that. Yeah, I don't see it listed there for that option. So they don't want you editing with Final Cut, I guess, on a MacBook. So let's see with the MacBook Pro. Unless they got rid of this option, but you used to be able to buy the systems with it pre-installed. And let's see if they do that here. Yeah, and you can see pre-installed software. So that, to me, would be a sign that they don't want you editing with Final Cut on a MacBook, but you can still do it. So you will see this option that has a pre-installed software. So you can add Final Cut here to get Final Cut pre-installed on your Mac. And then essentially it'll come with the system then. You're paying the exact same price as you would if you bought it through the App Store directly. So the answer is no, you can't get it for free pre-installed. You don't get that. It doesn't come with the system. You do have to buy it as an add-on, either after you get the system through the App Store, or you can select the pre-install option when you buy the system if you're buying it directly from Apple. I don't think there's really any benefits to having it pre-installed other than the second you turn it on, it's there. I usually just buy it from the App Store. That way I know it's on the correct account. I'm getting it to the right Apple ID instead of using a code to add it over through that spot. So that was Mohit's question through Instagram. Again, if you got stuff, please reach out. No hesitation there. I wanted to try to keep this to an hour long, but I really like the demo we're going to do here with Motion. So we're going to go a little bit over in time, which is fine. I don't have anywhere to be as far as the this stream goes. This is the most important thing. So we're going to get this demo in, and this will be the last thing I have. If you do have any other questions, just post them in the chat there. I'll try to get them. Easy recorder. Yeah, and again, everything you said with that synchronized clips in the chat there, it should work. There's got to be something that we're missing that's just a little oversight or something with the clips that we should be able to get that to work. So just have to see those specific clips to get that working. So if you're familiar with Final Cut, you may have noticed that we have a titles and generators sidebar. And when we go into our titles, we can see all these fun titles we can add in and create and have fun with. And most of these titles and effects and generators, if you right click on them, there's an option that says open a copy in Motion. And Motion is at least in the US, it's a $50 app, and this app allows you to do motion graphics and motion designs. And if you've gone on and bought a plugin from someone and are using it, in most cases, a lot of these plugins have been designed and built using Motion. So Motion is an excellent app. If you want to do any motion graphics work, I strongly recommend getting it and learning it. However, it is a beast. If you think Final Cut is difficult to learn, get into Motion. You'll find even more stuff. Like, that's just going down into a much more technical realm. However, I wanted to give a Motion demo here just so you could see something that's possible. This was a question that came to me a while ago through, I believe it was through Facebook Messenger. I think someone reached out on the Facebook group there. But we're going to go in and dig into this. So if I do open a copy in Motion for this, what do they call this? Boogie Lights. What do they call it in Final Cut? They do call it, okay, Boogie Lights. Yeah, Boogie Lights copy. So here's the copy of that effect. And we can see it. I can scrub through it, and there's that effect. I see all the layers on the left side. You can go through and customize this template. And then using Command-Tab, I'll switch back to Final Cut. We can see that second option there. So that's how you could go through and customize a lot of these templates, is using Motion. But the question I had was, how can I create an animated map using Motion? So we're going to actually create that map here. I'm going to close this project. I'm going to close out of Final Cut. Done with that here. And we're going to create a new Motion project. So when you go up to the File menu, you have an option for New, and it'll bring up usually the project browser, which is this one there. And if you're new to Motion, the way it works, you have a whole bunch of collections on the left side you can select from. But in most cases, I like to start with a blank project. If you're designing an effect, a transition, a generator, a title, any of those for Final Cut, you can select the template. But we'll start with just a Motion project. We just want to build an animated map, so we're going to do that right here inside of a standard Motion project. On the right side, we see our presets. Similar to creating a Final Cut project, you can select the frame size that you want to use. You can also go down to Custom, and you'll get the options to enter in exactly the frame size you want to use. In this case, I know I'm creating this for someone who's got some pretty high quality footage, so I'm actually going to create a 4K project. Ultra HD, I can see at the bottom here, it puts in my resolution for that project. The frame rate, however, they're not using a high frame rate. They're just going to use the 30 frames per second. And then I see my duration for the project. Right now it's set to 10 seconds. You can change this if you want to any time. I'm going to actually do this animation over a 5-second period of time. So I'm going to set it to 5 seconds as the default here. You can certainly change that after the fact. Then I'll hit return, and that creates my project. And with Motion, what I always do is the first step is I click here in the viewer and I hit Shift Z. If you know from Final Cut, Shift Z fits the viewer into the actual viewer here so I could see the whole view, which had to shrink it down to 55% instead of at 100. Okay, so here's my project. Unlike Final Cut, there's no autosave being built in. You do have to remember to save your projects here in Motion. So get back into the habit, if you've gotten out of it, make sure you use Command S to go and save your project. And in this case, haven't saved it yet, so it brings up the dialog. I'm just going to save it on the desktop, and I'm going to call it my map. And if you hit save, it'll save it. If you wanted to, you can have it also collect all the media into the project, which I actually do want to copy it to a folder, and I'll hit save. Okay, cool. So we have our blank canvas here. There's nothing on it. I can even go up to the top right here and change it to a transparent canvas, which we can see checkerboard means it's transparent, so it's going to look right through it. So there's a couple things that we want to do. We want to animate directions on a map, and that's going to start with the map. We need to get an actual map. So I'm going to do that using Google Maps, and I believe we can do this as long as we give credit to Google. I believe I was reading in their terms that you can do that. So I'm going to go to Google Maps. Let me bring it over on so you can see this. And then here we have our map. Let's zoom way out and see where we're going. We're going in Hollywood. I have some family, we'll say, coming in. They're going to be staying at one of the hotels here, and we want to give them a little animated maps for directions. So let's see, where are they staying? Let's say they're staying over here at the Sunset Gower Studios, and they're going to be going up to the Magic Castle for a show. So I'm going to zoom out one step here. This will be our map that we get. You can certainly go through and customize the way that the map looks, but this is the map I want to use. So to use it, I'm going to use Shift Command 4 to take a screenshot. I'm going to hit the space bar because I want this entire window, and I'll just click on it to get that saved in there. The other thing I want to do, I'm going to move this so that it's right here, and you'll see what I'm doing here in just a second. Because I want at the lower center here, there's the Google logo. I want to make sure that Google gets credit for the map. So I'm going to take a screenshot of Google down there, but I wanted a solid gray background, so I moved the map so that that was there. And then I also want to make sure that it says map data, copyright Google, so I'm going to take a little screenshot of this area. We don't need the terms. We'll keep the location for US in there. And as I'm doing this with Shift Command 4, it's taking those screenshots. You might have noticed in the lower right corner, it's putting them up there for a second and then saving them. That's a Mojave feature, but it saved all of those onto the desktop. Cool. So I have my map images created. So I'm going to close out of this window. I'm going to go into a new Finder window. Oops, not a new motion window. Go into a new Finder window. I'm going to go Shift Command D to get to my desktop. There's my 3 screenshots. I'll just select them all and drag them into motion. Okay, so that's our first step here. I have the 3 screenshots. I'm going to start with my map view back here. I'm going to go into the inspector under properties, and I'm going to change my scale up here to adjust the size of the map. I'm trying to make it easy for them to see everything. And I know they're going from we're going to say the Sunset Gower Studios down here. They're going to be starting there, and they're going to probably walk up over on Hollywood Boulevard, and then they're going to get up eventually to the Magic Castle. So we'll have them going through there. We're going to, it's a little far. They're going to take a taxi instead. We're not going to have them walk. So I'll double click in the layers section here and just call this the map. On the right side, I'm going to lock the layer because I like where this layer is. That way I don't accidentally move it. And then I have my Google option here, which unfortunately has my arrow on it. So let me switch back to Google Maps. I don't like the arrow. So let me show you what I'm doing here. And we're going to move this way over here. There's my Google. I'm going to do Shift Command 4. Grab just the Google logo. There we go. Now I'll close the map. I'll switch back to the Finder, bring in, there it is, bring in my Google logo. Okay, cool. So now I have the Google logo here, so I can just drag this down and make sure that that's listed on the map so that we're giving credit there to Google so that they are okay there. I could do the same thing with my map data copyright. I can drag that down into the corner. Okay, cool. So I've gotten my credit there to Google. I'm going to lock this map layer group. Actually, let me unlock it because this is going to be the map group. Now I can lock it. I can close it. We have our map, right? So that's the first step. We want to create the map and be able to get all of that information there. with it. Next, we want to go in and add essentially the path that we're going to take in for this map. So for this one, there's a bunch of tools built into Motion, and I'm going to use the Bezier tool, which as you get more into motion graphics and design, these are great tools to understand and use. If you're used to Photoshop or another app, you might have used these tools. And we're going to add some points on here to create this path. So I'm just clicking in my canvas. You might notice nothing's happening right now because I actually need to create a new group for this to go into. And I'm going to call this group path. And that was because my maps group was locked. It wasn't allowing me to add it. So we'll go back to Bezier tool. And I'm going to click. We're going to go up to Sunset Boulevard. We'll go over on Sunset. Go up to Hollywood. Now let's go all the way up. Which I'm going to go up to Yucca Street. You'll notice there's a curve here on the street. So I can actually, on my next point, click and drag. And I get my Bezier handles, which allow me to create a little bit of a curved path. I'll then hold Option and drag this handle over because we're going to take a left turn on Franklin here. And that's going to take me right over to the Magic Castle. So I have my path here. I'm going to hit return or enter, and that creates the path. Obviously, this path is ugly and not a line or anything like that, but you'll notice in the inspector, under the shape inspector, I get a fill option and an outline. I don't need a fill, so I'll uncheck that. And then my outline here is the path itself. So I'm going to make it just a black line. I'm going to increase the width. And there we get our little path line, right, happening. If I wanted it to be a dotted line, I could definitely change this to airbrush. And I could change the width. Still with that, I have the spacing option, which as I increase that, that means there's more space in between each of these dots. I can go over to the brush profile and shrink down my white color here. That's taking away some of the white spots and the kind of the airbrushness out of those circles, which maybe then after doing that, I want to change the width and the spacing with each of these to be some kind of a little dot there. Okay, and all these things, I mean, Motion has so many controls, so there's a lot of customization that you can do with all these. So don't hesitate to go in here and play with those and adjust those and create a path that you actually want to see. So now with this, I love this dotted line, but I want it to actually animate onto the screen as if we're moving across that path. So there are behaviors built in that you can go in and do, and you can definitely go into this. There's actually one under shape called write on. And if you think of this like actually writing on paper, you're writing on the path. And if I scrub across the project, notice that little dotted line goes across the map there. It gives us a little animation of writing onto it. So definitely something you can do as a way to animate those. The other option is to use keyframes, and we're going to see that in the next part of this because I really like the animated line. Looks good. But just to add some more to this and what the original person was asking for, the video they wanted to recreate was actually to have a little animated taxi going across this line. So I like it. I'm going to lock the path. I'm going to create a new group, hit return, call this group taxi. And I actually have a taxi picture on the desktop from a royalty-free site, so we're able to reuse this and not have to pay any rights to it, which is great. So here's my taxi picture. Obviously, it's not just the taxi itself. So what I'm going to do is hit the Z key to enable my zoom tool, just like you could do with Final Cut. Hit the H tool for the hand tool, center this over here. Okay, and then with the taxi selected, there's a mask button down here at the bottom of Motion, and I can actually draw a Bezier mask around this taxi. And this is something that if we're just clicking, does a straight line, but if you saw with the path on the street, I can also click and drag, and then it'll create a curved line. Out of anything, if you can get really good at drawing these masks, you can save yourself a lot of time. So I do also want to keep the little shadow in this mask, so I'll do that. And I'm not being too precise because you don't want to just sit here and watch me make all these points. So hopefully you get the idea and you can spend the time. This is one of the time-consuming parts of motion graphics, is being very specific with all these paths that you create. But that's going to be what changes it from being just kind of a rough path to something that looks really, really good. So as you go through, another feature of the path here is if you hold the Option key down, you can actually add points. So if you missed a spot, you can certainly add those points in later on. You can also right-click or control-click on a point, and you have an option to change this from linear to smooth. Smooth is where it has these handles. Linear is just a straight, essentially just from this point on, it's just going straight to that next point. There's no curve or anything. So this looks pretty good. I've cropped into it. However, I may also want to crop out the windows that are there. So I'm going to select the whole group here, go into my Bezier mask again, and we'll go in and crop out a window because that shouldn't be there. Almost, if I close it. There we go. And actually, we want this underneath the taxi, not the other group there. So let me do. Let's move this over right under there. Okay. And why am I not seeing my mask? I think, let's see if we group this one and put the mask on that group. There we go. And then we'll do, oh, no. I'm sorry. Right now it's trying to crop into this one. So we actually want these masks to mix together. So with this mask selected in the mask inspector, there's a couple options that you have here, but we want the mask blend mode to be subtract. Right? Subtract? Or is it add for both of them? Preserve scale, invert mask. So we want to add that, but we want to subtract this one, and we'll invert the masks. Okay, well, let's see if we go up. Not inverted. Okay. All right, sorry about that. This could be kind of confusing in your layering and everything. So let me show you another window. I'm not going to do every window here, but let me show you another one. So with the taxi layer selected, we go down to the Bezier mask. We're going to click on our points here to mask out our window. And with the mask selected, you're going to go over to your blend mode or mask mode typed for it and select subtract. And what that's doing is essentially you're punching a hole through this area and subtracting that area of it. If I uncheck the map in the background, notice now we have that checkerboard there. So again, taxi selected, hit the Bezier mask tool, and you can use any of these mask tools. You could do a freehand mask, for example, and then just click and drag around. I like the points because this car is a very specific shape, but maybe you're drawing out a person or something else, so maybe a freehand mask is easier to use. And then with that mask selected, just say mask blend mode, change it to subtract, and then it punches the hole through that window, and you could certainly go back and adjust the mask and change that. Okay, so you could go through and do that for all the little points and little areas just to be very specific about this. Again, that's being almost over specific with this because you're barely even going to see those windows. But attention to detail, it's important. I think it's really important, and that's something. For example, we can select this mask and we can go to our feather. We could feather the edges just a little bit, might make it look a little smoother. A lot of things you can do with motion. So there's our little taxi there, and it doesn't look too bad. I'm going to shrink them way down because I want it to be on the path there. I'll bring the map back up so we can see that. The taxi is facing the wrong way, though, because what we're going to do is have this taxi kind of drive along the path up until it gets to our magic castle there, our destination. So I need to flip this around. So with the taxi selected, you can go up to filters, if I remember correctly, and we have a distortion option called flop, which is kind of like invert. So it's moving it over. So now the front of the little taxi bus here is on the left instead of the right. So we just flop that over. And filters are a way to filter through or add kind of some visual changes to your layers that you have selected. And then behaviors is how you can actually do animations. So we did a behavior earlier to our path to do the right on behavior, and that's what the little gear is. But that's what a behavior is inside of motion. Okay, and now to actually animate where this little taxi's going across the line, to make this easier, I have to do all this with the timeline down at the bottom. And on the right side here, I'm going to hide the audio part of it. I just need the video. And my taxi's starting at frame 65. I don't want that. I want it to be all the way to the start of it. So I'm going to drag this over to the start of the project. That way the taxi's always there. And then going over to the beginning of the project, playhead, very important that you're at the beginning, and you can choose either of these. we're going to turn on the record animation button, which I'm not a fan that this is the shortcut, but if you press the letter A, that enables recording, which means any motion, any changes you make here in the viewer, keyframes are going to be recorded. So I don't like that the shortcut A is to enable and disable that, because it's very easy to accidentally enable recording and then you can mess everything up. So just be careful with that. And in Final Cut, A is to get your arrow and select tool, which is extremely common to do. So that's some things on there. But anyway, we want our recording to be turned on because we do want it to record the changes that we make with this bus. So I know the bus is going to start down here at the Gower Studios. So I'm going to start it down here as if it's going down the street, or in this case up, because that's how the video is labeled. And I'll position it where it needs to go. But I'm also going to add a keyframe with rotation, which I can see it did here, position and rotation. That's the only things I'm changing. So I'm verifying that those both have keyframes. It looks good. So now let me hit the ZT key in the hand. I want to zoom into this area so you can see what we're doing. And then you do Shift S to go to the arrow tool instead of A. So now if we drag the playhead down a little bit, I can see the path is starting to be drawn on the screen. So I'm going to drag it right to where it gets to that corner. And I'm going to move this bus, or this taxi here, up to the corner. And I just moved it up and over a little bit. So all it did is added a position keyframe. But I know I'm animating rotation. So because I'm animating rotation, I'm going to add a keyframe to rotation. And this looks good. I don't want the bus to turn yet. I'm going to have it turn on the next over the next couple ones. So that looks good. And then we'll have it go down here. And now I want it to rotate. So I'm going to rotate, or move it. Let's move it over here. And then we'll rotate it over. Because I changed both the position and the rotation, you can see it added keyframes for both of those parameters. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to hit my ZT tool to enable zoom. I'm going to hold Option, and I'm going to click and drag. By holding Option, I'm zooming out. I can hit the hand tool to move this down a little bit, and then I'm going to hit Shift S to go back to my selector arrow tool, and then we'll drag this down. Just actually, let me go back and show you that. So now I can see it's kind of turning across the Gower Street, or the intersection there. So then we'll go down. I can see the path is just a straight line up until we get to Highland. So I'll say right before we get to Highland, I'm going to drag it over now. And because we have record on, it moves it over. It adds a keyframe. But I didn't rotate it, so there's no rotation keyframe. So I'm going to make sure I hit the plus there to add that keyframe. I'm going to hold down the letter H to get my hand tool just to move this over a little bit. And again, the hand tool is not moving any object. I'm not moving the map. If I do Shift Z and zoom out, all that the hand tool is doing is moving what I'm seeing in the viewer here. So let's go back, zoom in, and there we go. And then Shift S to move back over. So now, move a couple frames over to where that dot is around the turn, which is probably about there. And I'm going to go in and move it up a little bit and do the rotation as well. Rotate it. I want it kind of up, so we'll do it right about there. Okay, cool. So that should be fine. Looking over here, I can see both position and rotation have keyframes. So now we can move now to the next point, which I can't see. So I'm going to use the hand tool, move up a little bit. And we're going to see, we get to this little tiny turn on the map. So I'm going to go up to about Yucca Street there. And Shift S to go back to my select tool, drag this up, and right about there. And again, I didn't rotate it, but I do want to add a rotation keyframe. So I'm going to do that here in the inspector. We'll then move a little bit further down in time, right till it gets to the intersection. We'll move it up to there, and actually we'll even start rotating it. Actually, no, we want it to rotate this way because it's kind of going around the turn. Go a couple frames to the right here, move it over, rotate it. You can see how tedious this is, but this is motion graphics work. Then we'll go down to the end of the project here where we get to the Magic Castle, our destination there. And just for the fun of it, just in case I wanted to do more work later, I'm going to add the keyframe for rotation just so we have all of that. Okay, cool. So let me show you what we have here. I'm going to click in the canvas here, do Shift Z to zoom out. Go back to the beginning. I'm going to do Command R. Command R renders a RAM preview, which will make things a lot smoother when we're going through. and I'll hit the space bar to play this. Notice the bus goes. When it gets to the turns, maybe a little bit strange as far as the animation. You might want to refine those. For example, especially on this rotation here, it kind of makes a weird turn. So I could select the taxi, hit the Z key to zoom in, and looking at my keyframes here, I could see there's some weird turns. So I'll select this one. I can do Option Drag to adjust that Bezier handle. If I don't hold Option, notice it moves both of them. But if I hold Option, I can move just the left side up here. I don't like this weirdness. I'll just reposition that so it's about there. Move this down. Select the next keyframe. Hold Option. Move this up. That might give us a slightly smoother animation. Yeah, more of like a realistic turn that the taxi's making across that spot. So again, I'm being very specific at the end here, but you can see how doing that kind of work is very powerful and very specific, but that's what you get into with motion graphics. So now we can see our taxi's following that line as it goes through the path, around the turn, and then we end up getting to the Magic Castle at the end of it. So that's how you can create an animated map using motion and just doing it right in there. With keyframes, we looked at behaviors, filters, making a mask, drawing a shape where we did the line and the actual path. We looked at some of the tools. We looked at animation and hitting A so that you disable record animation so you don't add any accidental keyframes. And essentially, we've created our effect here. So if we're ready to take this back to Final Cut, you can go up to the top right, hit the share button, similar to Final Cut, and you have an option to export that movie right on out. When you export the movie, you would save it into hopefully a folder for all of your content that you're using with the folder. Maybe do same as source for the export quality so you get the best quality out and into Final Cut. And you don't have to open it with QuickTime. You can say none for that. We have no audio in this project, so I could choose video only. And if we click on summary, we get an idea of the project that's going to be created there. So that's all you'd have to do. Hit next. You can save it on the desktop or wherever you want. Because these are graphics, you might want to add a version number into the name. Hit return, and you'll go and save that onto the desktop, and then we can import that right into Final Cut. Whew. So that was about 20 minutes or so, but that's how you can create an animated map using motion. You might be able to get away with this inside of Final Cut. However, motion is just extremely powerful. We just looked at just the kind of surface of what you can create. This might be about the extent of what you can create in Final Cut. And as we want to get further in, especially with masking and doing things like that, the tools inside of motion are much more powerful. So definitely I'd recommend checking that out. If you don't own it, go to anawesomeguide.com. And you can click on the motion link that I have there to get you over to the App Store to be able to buy it. Just full disclosure, if you hit that link, I do get a little commission from that. I don't think anyone's actually done it yet, but I'm not sure how much it is. But that can help support this channel, so I would greatly appreciate that if you are considering it. If you do have other questions or things that you want to see done with motion or Final Cut, any of these things, don't hesitate to reach out. And then we do have one last question, it looks like, in the chat here. You said adding captions to my YouTube videos, but since I added it directly, I didn't see a place to tell YouTube it was there. I'm now just tagging it as closed caption English. So I'm not sure the exact question that's being asked here. I have a whole video that's on captions that will go through step by step. The big thing with sharing, especially to YouTube and some of these other places when we're talking about captions, is the role that the caption is set to needs to be accurate and correct, because I believe the ITT format of captions does not get shared to YouTube, or there's not an option for that. And let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to do option C here to add a caption. We're just going to call this test. So we have our caption tracks here, right? You might do option C to go and add a bunch of captions into your project. I'll just call this the second one. This will be the first one. And when you have your captions here, notice on the left column it says English ITT. It might be really hard for you to see it over the stream, but if you're following along in Final Cut, you'll see on the left column the name for that role, for that caption role. And if you hit the index, you'll go in here and you'll be able to see your captions listed. But if you go under roles, you can actually see each of these formats and what they're set up to. And what this allows you to do is on the left column, there's a checkbox where you can disable those captions just visually so that they're not showing up on your in your viewer there. If you notice, the little 222 shows up here. On the right side, you can do some things with rearranging that, which again, watch the video on captions that I have dedicated and it'll go through all this. But then you'll notice that it's set to ITT for the format. So that's the something that a lot of times when you go up to share your project, which you were saying you're sharing to YouTube, so I'll select YouTube here. I'll click on settings. You'll notice down here it says include captions, and this one is doing ITT captions, so that it should allow you to do that and send those up and share those up to YouTube. I believe, and now that I'm rereading the questions, you're saying that you're just tagging it as closed caption English, so you might be captioning it in a different language and trying to send it up to YouTube. And I could be wrong on this, and feel free to reach out to YouTube support directly in their documentation. But from what I've seen, I believe that the videos up there don't allow you to have multiple caption tracks. I think I've tried to share that, and I couldn't find a way to have multiple selections there, which for me seemed really weird, so I may just be missing something on YouTube's site. But that might be what you're running into, is that you only have an option to include the one type of caption track. For example, let's go in and add another caption track here. Go down, edit captions, duplicate captions as, oh, we don't have anything selected. Let's do add caption. I'm going to change this to, let's do the English CEA format, 222. Let's select this one and do edit roles. We'll do add a caption role. I'm going to do another SRT format. Let's do this one. I'm going to add a language of, let's do Finnish. Why not? And then option C, add another caption here. We'll put this over on Finnish. Okay. So now I have a whole bunch of caption roles, right? So if I go up to the share menu, go down to YouTube, we should see what I believe you were running into under settings. We have an option to include captions, but we only have the option to include one caption track. And I believe that's just a limitation of YouTube, that you're going to have to select the specific one that you want to send up. Yeah, and that could be, yeah, I see your comment in there. You're saying that you're making it as a master file and then uploading it. Ideally, though, when you go to share a master file, I think I said everything on the YouTube page, right? You can only select one. But when you share it as a master file, under the roles section, this is where you'll see all the options for the captions. And it can be a little confusing because there's this option down here where you can check out off these boxes to export the captions. But this is exporting a separate file as the caption file. And you could have 3 separate files that it could include. What you actually want to look at is this blue captions button that's to the right of the video. You actually want these captions to be embedded with the video so that it's included with it. But same thing, the type of caption that can get embedded into a video is a CEA 608 format. So notice I only have that one option. That's because the English ITT format and the SRT format, they're not able to be embedded into videos. That is just there's a lot of rules and technical reasons for that, but that could be too if you don't have the format set. But again, usually with these, you get kind of the option there that you want to embed those. I believe, let's try this. I believe you should be able to embed multiple captions. I might take that back in just a second, but I believe that's the case. So let's add another CEA role. So under CEA 608, I'm going to add, let's add Japanese, hit apply. I'm going to do option C to add a new caption track, set it to Japanese. we go. Yes, I am converting it. That's okay. Okay, now let's go up to share master file. And in our roles on the side here, we can see embedded CEA 608 Japanese. If I hit caption, yeah, it's only allowing me to embed one of these caption files. And I'm 100% sure I've seen files that you'll have multiple selections for your caption files. So this may be just a limitation of Final Cut, or I'm missing something on the captions. If so, please don't hesitate. Let me know. Put it in the comments. Reach out to me. But this lets you select what caption files you want to do. And again, this is all talking about embedded captions, which embedded captions is something that the viewer can then either enable or disable. So if I want to see the captions, I can turn it on. If not, I can turn it off. The other option here is burn in the captions. And you might be saying, okay, you can click on this, and then you do get the ITT and the SRT. You get all the different formats. Well, burned in captions are always on the screen. It's think if you had a piece of paper in there and you're pushing and burning the font onto the paper, it's there. So me as the viewer, if I'm watching this video later, if I've burned in the captions, I can't turn that off. So you definitely don't want this when you're going up to YouTube. For the purposes of captions, I strongly recommend embedding it. That way the person gets the option. But if you share directly to YouTube using your share destinations, that's just, I don't see a reason not to use that. When you want to publish, it just is so much nicer because you get those options and it'll include that track that you selected and send right up. Cool. So that's the questions that I see in the chat. If you have any other additional questions, again, you can always reach out to finalcutprohelp@me.com. And I thank everyone for joining the stream. I'm going to end it here with a couple other resources and some other things that you can reach out to. I like to do this on all the streams. The first thing is that Final Cut Pro Help menu. When you're in Final Cut, click on Help at the top. And actually, let's do a little quick demo of this. Any question you have about any feature, just go up to the menu here, click on Help, and then click on Final Cut Pro 10 Help. This is documentation that is extremely helpful. There is so much information in this documentation that it can be annoying to have to read through these and figure out a feature, but you can even go through here to learn about what's possible. Hit the overview, it starts taking you through some features. If you show the sidebar here, you get everything that's listed. So as an example, we were just working with captions, right? And trying to figure out some things about captions. So we could go up to the search and type in captions. And we get some suggestions for things. But if I just do the search for captions, notice the first thing in the help here, create captions, import captions, overview. We have all these options. So I can just click on create captions. Gives me a brief overview, shows me what these formats are. I could click on it. If you have no idea what CEA 608 is, click on it. Gives you a description of what that is and why it's there. And this information is extremely helpful. It breaks it out based on the different options. Some of them give you step-by-step instructions. If anything, most of them do. And they even include screenshots when it's helpful. So you can see a lot of step-by-step information in there. So definitely don't hesitate. Use that help menu to get you through things because it is helpful. And I go to it all the time to verify features and to check on things because especially captions is relatively a new feature to Final Cut, just a year or so old. And when a new feature comes out, I know nothing about it. I just know the things that I've read about it, and that help menu tends to be very, very detailed, even when the feature is right there and brand new. So use that help menu. You can also go over to my website, anawesomeguide.com. I have some information on there. And like I said earlier, starting today, we're looking for the shortcut of the year for 2019. And the bracket is going to be up there on An Awesome Guide. You can even sign up for individual one-on-one training. All kinds of things are there. So head over to the website. You can see that there and follow along. You can also follow us at Final Cut Pro Help on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, like I've mentioned a couple times. Don't hesitate. Share us at Final Cut Pro Help. Share any content that we post on there with your friends, anyone else that you think will benefit from this. And if you are shy, you don't want to post your questions publicly on any of those places, I totally understand. Just direct message me. On Instagram tends to be the easiest, but you can also reach out on Twitter and Facebook. Otherwise, the easiest tends to be on Instagram, but the best way to reach out to me is with the email, finalcutprohelp@me.com. If I don't reply to you after a couple days, send me another one. I might have missed it, might have gotten put into junk, something like that. So I try to respond to everything that comes in. And yeah, that's what I got for you. This was episode 12 of Final Cut Pro Help Live. Today marks our 1-year anniversary of this show. So if you've been watching since the beginning, awesome. If this is your first time watching, subscribe. That way you'll get notifications. We try to go live every month. We haven't done that. We've missed one last year, but try to go live on the first of every month to provide you some tips, some different things. We don't have a show topic for the next episode yet, so if there's something you really want to see demoed and done, you can always reach out and recommend it. Say, hey, this is what I want to learn a lot more about, and we might put that as the topic for the next show. Otherwise, again, thank you for watching, and make sure to subscribe on all the social platforms. That way you'll be able to keep track and find out what our shortcut of the year is. On the next episode, we won't have crowned a next shortcut, but we'll be getting pretty close. So tune in for that show. You'll be able to see kind of the final couple rounds and which shortcut is leading the way. But make sure to vote. That way we know exactly which shortcut should win.